Hello, and welcome to another issue of Storied Arcs. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we're coming to you with my favorite comic creator of all time. I was going to say comic writer, but he's also my favorite comic artist. And if I say comic artist, that's reductive because he's also my favorite comic writer. He's my favorite comic creator, period, Jeff Lemire. And the initial struggle we had here is like, yeah, obviously I want to do Jeff Lemire, but where do you even start?
Yeah.
And we're starting with the one-shot masterpiece, The Underwater Welder. Goes straight to trade. Never came out in single issue, never came out in either format, just however many printings this book is in now.
Yeah, I guess it's about 10 years old from its first printing. Originally came out August 29th, 2012, but has since been republished and reprinted a number of times. So yeah, no, it's as much as I'm a Jeff Lemire fan myself, and I love almost all of his work. I've read the vast majority of it, but I don't think I can quite compare to your fandom of him, Mike, because I'm not.
There's just something, and here's the crazy thing is that even this book, sort of genre-wise, counts as horror. Like there are horror, like psychedelic horror, like David Lindelof picks off on his introduction. And he definitely goes more horror in something like Gideon Falls.
Yeah.
And I think
Gideon Falls is like a straight horror. I mean, that is a horror premise. I wouldn't call Underwater Welder horror per se.
I think I would. And I guess it's whatever Hitchcock is. Hitchcock, I guess, was not horror. He's thriller. Like psycho thriller. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the that Lindelof introduction, and he compares it to Twilight Zone, and I think that's
the perfect.
Exactly. Yeah. And I wouldn't call Twilight Zone, like I wouldn't label that under horror. There are horror parts to it. There are times when
that's true. Although isn't the remake made by Jordan Peele?
Well, yeah, but I'm saying
cut his teeth in horror.
But we're talking about Rod Sterling here, the original.
Right.
There could be Twilight Zone stories that venture into horror, but it's not necessarily
so to me, I guess thriller is a subset of horror.
Okay.
And I think horror is a bigger genre than hack and slash, which I don't like.
Well, definitely. Yeah.
And jump scares.
Yeah.
Which I also don't like.
Yeah, you just mentioned Jordan Peele. His stuff is horror, but it's not. He's not about blood and guts and jump scares. It's fact, it's psychological and
I have been so pleased each time I see one of his movies.
Yeah.
That I don't feel manipulated. I don't feel like unnecessarily traumatized, and I get enough resolution that I can walk out to my car without feeling scared. Unlike the time I was taken to see the movie Saw in theaters.
Yeah,
and then I was like waiting for a flash of light and to wake up in a bathtub.
It is tough. It is tough when you have something like Get Out and Saw both considered horror when really like those are entirely different genres. But as it is. I guess that's how it goes. But
yeah, so
Underwater Welder again. I wouldn't consider this. I wouldn't consider this book. I wouldn't know.
I mean, the back cover we just have, it says graphic novel, drama. Just so Barnes and Noble knows where to put it. And I think it's like, sure, call it drama. That's a broad, like, to me, drama is the simple dichotomy between it's either comedy or drama.
Yeah,
like that's all it really says. It's like it's not a comedy, so put it with drama. That's like calling it. It's like it's fiction.
Exactly. Yeah. Is it fiction or is it nonfiction?
Or like the binary. Like, is it poetry or is it prose? It's like 87% of what's written is prose. That's not a super helpful distinction. But before we dive into the book itself, why don't you tell us a little bit about Top Shelf Productions? Which honestly, this has been my favorite graphic novel since I discovered it. I think in 2014. So I was a little late to the scene. But there's something about it that just resonated with me. I read it again in 2017 or 18, and then I read it again this week, and it still hits me. It just messes with me.
Yeah.
And there's nothing like shock value or shocking. And if I describe the plot to someone, because I tell people like this book is really important to me. I think to me this book is what to you. I was going to call it the Fade Out. It's not the Fade Out. It's the one Day Tripper.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Like Day Tripper is in your top 5?
Yeah,
top
probably,
3?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's just, you can't argue whether you like Day Tripper or not. That is an emotionally heavy book.
Yes. Yeah.
It's very substantial. It's a force to be reckoned with, and there's just no way that doesn't impact you.
No, and I think it's a book that specifically Day Trip on, and I think also Underwater Welder, that when you read, I think at different points in your life, it will hit you in different ways, because you will connect with different things, things that you connected with when you were maybe first read it when you were younger, will resonate more or less when you're older because of the themes that he's playing with, that Lemire plays with. But yeah, we'll get to that role in a bit here. But yeah, first with Top Shelf, it's a production company that it's small, but I think prolific. It's got some really big stuff that's come out. It was sold to IDW in 2015, so now it's an imprint of IDW. And Underwater Welder, as you mentioned, first came out in 2012, then re-released in 2016, and that's actually when I came to it, because I missed it initially because I wasn't a big, I didn't get Lemire's art, his style. And I think we'll touch on that, and I'll talk about how I came around to it once I guess, quote unquote, figured it out for myself. But I missed it initially, and again, being on Top Shelf at the time, it wasn't a place I was really reading books. But then when I go back and think about it, some of the notable books that came out on Top Shelf prior to it being sold to IDW, Jeff Lemire produced Essex County on Top Shelf, which is kind of his magnum opus.
I guess I should have known that.
Yeah.
But I didn't. And when you said, you were like, oh, I got some notes on Top Shelf. I'm like, Top what?
Yeah.
I didn't know I had heard of it before, and that I own multiple books from
Here's another one. Blankets by Craig Thompson.
Oh, my gosh.
Came out on Top Shelf.
Yeah. It's do we even get to cover blankets on this podcast? Like,
I don't know. That'll be tough.
Can you even summarize it or talk about it without just ruining it?
I
it's
don't
a
know.
Delicate, beautiful thing.
That maybe it's one we just recommend. Let's go read this on your own.
Yeah, go read Blankets. Yeah. You will look at it and think, this is daunting, this is huge, and you'll finish it in one sitting.
Alan Moore, the great Alan Moore, has had a number of books on Top Shelf, From Hell, Lost Girls, and the original run of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. So he's had some big things come out there.
Big one.
And even after the sale to IDW, one of my favorite books that's probably ever been released, one of the best nonfiction books, is John Lewis's March trilogy.
Oh yes, I just picked up book one. I cringe to admit this to people. I did buy it on Prime Day from Amazon. Sorry, brick and mortar shops. I don't buy most of my comics there, but it was like $5 for a nice edition of it. I was like, yeah.
The John Lewis's March trilogy, I think, is one of the most important books that's been released in the last 5-10 years. I think it should be taught in schools. It's that good. So yeah, it's something that even after being acquired by IDW, that Top Shelf can still put out some heavy hitting stuff. And it's just also kind of indicative of Lemire's career in that he's pretty much worked everywhere. He's so prolific. You think about, you name a publisher, and he's probably got not just a book that's been published by them, but a notable and celebrated book, whether it's DC or Marvel, an Image.
I'm trying to think
Dark Horse.
I know he's done a number of things from Marvel, including Century and Old Man Logan.
Yeah. All New Hawkeye. He did some Moon Knight, Extraordinary X-Men.
All New Hawkeye. I forgot about that.
At
Big
DC,
yellow cover.
Green Arrow. Yeah. Obviously Animal Man, Justice League Dark. A lot of these these books he's worked on. They're celebrated runs, and then all of his independent stuff, whether like the stuff we mentioned on Top Shelf, over on Image, books like Platonia. With Emmy Lennox, 80 After Death with Scott Snyder, Family Tree with Phil Hester. These are big time names. We're recording this the week of the of San Diego Comic-Con 2022. The Eisner Awards had just happened, and he just won another Eisner for best digital comic.
Snow Angels.
With Snow Angels with Jock.
And that's Comixology original.
Comixology original, yes. He did a book for TKO called Sentient with Gabriel Hernandez-Walta, who people may know from the Vision series.
I loved Sentient. It's like Goonies in space, right?
He was the main artist on the Vision book with Tom King. And then the big one really is at Dark Horse, which he has his own Black Hammer universe, which is his take on superheroes. We're kind of a lifetime of reading and writing big time capes for Marvel, DC, or whatever. He's taken all that knowledge and he's compressed it into his own expanded universe.
Which in compressing, it's like on one hand, yes, it's compressing because you're conflating a lot of things. On the other hand, he's expanding it because he tells his own golden era that isn't cringy to the 21st century. I guess unlike the actual golden era.
Well, he also tells a story from like the 31st century, which is like your which is like your Legion of Superheroes stuff. But yeah, I guess compressing, I guess meant to is it's all into one universe. His own superhero universe, which is the premise that
internally
I love.
Consistent. There's no retconning in Black Hammer yet.
That's a setup that I love. One of my all-time favorite series is Astro City. Kurt Busiek wrote that series, and it's one city that's got a whole history of superheroes, and it's an anthology where you can have here's an arc on a hero of today, and then he has times going into history, and you learn everything about Astro City and the heroes that lived in it. And Black Hammer is the same way, where all these little miniseries and one shots and everything, you just get a full picture of everything that's gone on, in this case in Spiral City. And so, again, that's at Dark Horse here. And so he has worked kind of with everyone. But going forward, it looks like he's going to be exclusively at Image. Jeff Lemire,
very good for Image.
I think, Jeff Lemire earlier in 2022, back in January, he signed an overall exclusive deal, which is only the second known exclusive deal Image has ever put out there. The first one they did was with Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips, which basically said, we will publish any comic that you send us without having to pitch it to anybody. So if they have a book, they just make it and it gets printed out.
And that's worked out well for both parties, I think.
It has.
And as we mentioned in the Grass King Zero episode, the Image is no longer the dominant third publisher that it used to be.
No, I think they're,
and I think signing a guy like Lemire to a life contract is not officially a life contract.
I think it's a life contract.
It's like a college football grant of rights.
Yeah,
it's like you could never ever break this unless you want to.
Brubaker and Phillips, their deal was 5 years. They signed the first one in 2013. They re-upped in 2018, and I have to imagine they'll re-up in 2023. So I don't know if there's a year length on Lemire's contract with Image, but going forward, it's gonna all be there. And the first things that came out under that were Little Monsters and the Bone Orchard Mythos. Little Monsters with Dustin Nguyen, and Bone Orchard Mythos is a whole anthology horror series.
We somehow didn't even mention yet. Well, Dustin Nguyen, okay,
getting there,
Descender,
And the Bone Orchard Mythos is with Andrea Sorrentino, and Nguyen and Sorrentino are two guys that Lemire has worked with extensively on a number of projects, both creator-owned and for hire work at Marvel and DC.
So let me pause right here and say there are two ways you could read this CV that we've put together for him. The first way would be to say, this guy's like a total flake, or he burns bridges or something because he's always jumping from thing to thing. The other way to read it is he is so wonderful and easy to work with. Every publisher will work with him. Every artist that works with him will gladly come back and do more books. And I think it's obviously the latter.
Absolutely, yeah, because the one thing... So Nguyen and Sorrentino are probably two guys he's worked with the most and repeatedly. He's going to keep working with those guys. But I think the big telltale sign is if you look at the Black Hammer universe, we mentioned that's over on Dark Horse, pretty much everything he's done, all the various spin-offs, one-shots, anthology stories... Almost everyone he's worked with is someone he's worked with previously on some other book, whether another writer, another artist, whoever it is. All his collaborators, pretty much every single one of them, has contributed in some way to Lemire's own superhero universe in Black Hammer, which I think, again, goes to shows that he's the kind of guy that people want to work with.
Yeah.
That everyone's willing to work with him. They want to work with him. They're excited to work with him. And clearly he's someone that is a willing collaborator. Whether he is... again, he writes and draws his own stuff, but yet at the same time, he will also co-write things and maybe do the art, or he'll just be the writer and hand a script off to another artist.
Well, that was what confused me, because I had started with, I think Royal City was my first full purchasing a Lemire run and enjoying it. And he was writing, coloring,
whole thing, yep.
Penciling, everything. And then when I think Family Tree came out maybe a year, like 2015. It's been going for a little while, I think.
Well, Family Tree's over now, but that was
right.
12 issue mini. But yeah, that was a year or so later. Yeah, that was he was drawing
him and
that
Phil
himself.
Hester.
Yeah, Phil Hester did the art.
Yeah, and I started reading it, but I was like, oh yeah, he's writing this, but these don't look like Lemire characters per se. And I was like, oh, this is weird for him to be just a writer. That's actually the bulk of what he does.
Yeah.
And it's only these like top shelf image, things like that, where he gets to do a single vision thing.
At this point, yes. I think at this point in his career, the stuff that he's going to write and draw is either going to be like a one-shot, like graphic novel, something like Roughneck or Frog Catchers from a few years past, or something like Underwater Welder, or it may be like a limited preset miniseries like Maze Book, which he just put out, finished up. Like, I don't think he's going to do something like Sweet Tooth ever again, where the original Sweet Tooth was a long, ongoing series that he wrote, that he did everything on. He went back to it, did a sequel, Sweet Tooth Return, 6-issue miniseries.
Right.
So I don't think he's going to have
even
any
Ascender, returning to that, was wrapped in 15, 18, something. Yeah.
But that's collaboration with Dustin Wynn.
Right.
I'm saying that the stuff stuff he's writing and drawing on his own, anything that I get a feeling that the things that he's going to cartoon himself, write and draw and handle on his own, are all going to be pretty standalone, either original graphic novel size, or if it's something like a 6-issue plain mini. He's not going to have any sort of long runs.
And even as we saw,
the longer ongoing runs probably going to be collaborations with someone like Dustin or Andreas Sorrentino.
Right.
Yeah.
And even as we see, there's a letter in the back of Underwater Welder where he talks about all the things he was trying to wrap while he was wrapping Underwater Welder.
Yeah.
One of them was Sweet Tooth, and he mentions that Matt Kindt did some pinch hitting for him there. Doesn't say whether it was writing, penciling, coloring. I assume it was penciling or coloring or both. And Matt Kindt, who obviously we talked about in Grass Kings extensively. I didn't even know that was on Kindt's resume. I don't think it's listed most places.
Yeah, well, again,
but Lemire just slid him some work and was like, dude, I'm doing DC stuff. I'm trying to finish this Welder book. I got Sweet Tooth going. You got to help me close the gap here.
Yeah, well, and, when you look at, the guys that he's worked with before, the friends in the industry, Lemire and Kindt have worked together a lot. They just kickstarted the book in 2020, like a lot of creators did. They were together with artist David Rubin. It's called Cosmic Detective. It was a pretty cool story. Kindt worked in the Black Hammer universe as well. He did Black Hammer 45. So yeah, they, kind of, I get the sense that if you're in the industry and you're friends with Jeff Lemire, you're a collaborator with him, like you're in, like once you're in, and maybe if you're.
And I think he's so busy that I would imagine sometimes he, goes to Dustin and says, look, I got this little monsters thing. I think your style works for it. And other times, maybe Phil Hester comes to him and says, like, I've got some concept art. You want to put a story to it. Well, I don't know which direction each of those collaborations went, but I would imagine there's reciprocity. I don't think he's the brainchild of all of them.
I would imagine, especially the guys he's worked with a lot, that it all comes... it goes both directions where the idea comes from. That, you have an idea for an artist, or the artist knows that, hey, this is something that Jeff would knock out of the park, And again, it's when you look down his bibliography, you see a lot of the same names, and he's very loyal, and puts out a high level of work with these guys. And that extends beyond just the artist he works with, because the only other credit on Underwater Welder is the letterer, Steve Wands, and he letters pretty much everything Lemire does across all publishers, with the exception of Marvel. Marvel pretty much has their own in-house virtual calligraphy. They're in-house letterers, so kind of can't do that. But whether it's DC Vertigo, which Wands does a lot of his work for, but also a lot of his image books, everything like that. So he's familiar with Lemire's beats and his styles and everything like that. So it's not just the repeat, artist and colorist and all that he works with, even down to the person who's, physically putting his words on the page. He's working with that as well. So, just two just two credited names here, Lemire and Wands, and
yeah,
that's
and I mean, a guy like Sorrentino, I kind of think, I don't want to say anything unfair, but I think Lemire put him on the map. Really, I mean, he had other partnerships, but if you look at like Sorrentino's work, for instance, by the way, I'm not saying he propped up Sorrentino. Sorrentino's work speaks for itself. But if you look at everything he's done with Image, Sorrentino is Lemire. He did an iVampire run with DC before going to Green Arrow with Lemire. And then with DC, he's done Joker Killer Smile and Batman Smile Killer, both Lemire. Green Arrow 80th Anniversary, 100-page super spectacular writer, Jeff Lemire. And then his Marvel stuff is some Brian Michael Bendis, like annuals for all new X-Men. The original Old Man Logan with Brian Michael Bendis, which was 5 issues. And then Old Man Logan with Jeff Lemire. So it is like, he's got like one-shots with people other than Lemire, and it's all Lemire. So,
and I wonder too if it was a thing of when he was at DC, because a lot of times you just get put with an artist. And,
I think that's exactly.
And what happened?
They wrote a letter in the back of what was their big Gideon Falls, and they said, "Look, this is how we met. You know, we got randomly paired at one of the big two, and I guess it was DC.
I think it was DC, and then they paired up again for Old Man Logan at Marvel,
right?
And then once you start doing that, I think when you click with someone, you're like, well. Kind of the next logical step is
I kind of think Lemire won't let him go. I'm always going to put stuff across the plate for Sorrentino.
Well, I think when you have success at for hire work, the kind of the next logical thing is, well, hey, do you have any ideas for creator own? Can we take something to Image, pitch something there so we can own it and do our own thing? And yeah, the two of them have taken off, and they've done so much work together, and it's so great. And even though Sorrentino's art style is very different than Lemire's art style. Like, you put it next to each other.
And extremely different from Dustin Nguyen.
Yeah,
it's I mean, you can see that the type of story dictates the type of art for Lemire.
Well, and even when you look at Lemire's artwork and Nguyen's artwork, there's still kind of this flowy watercolor style to it. But like when you put them side by side, they look nothing alike, even though they're in the same medium. Like, it isn't like one guy's traditional, one guy's using like all digital. Like, it's
I think Dustin's much cleaner than
I would agree, but at the same time, they're the same mediums there. And if you we talked about Tyler Jenkins and Hillary Jenkins in the Grass Kings also working in that similar watercolor style. You can put them up next to each other, and there's more similarity, I think, between what the Jenkins do and what Lemire would do with his own stuff, but not with Nguyen's. So, just because it's the same medium doesn't mean it's going to look the same, And I think it's very cool that Lemire has latched on to some of these guys who are very distinctive, because I think you look at the way that Dustin Nguyen draws character, especially draws faces. I think you can say, okay, you see someone, you're like, oh, that's Dustin Nguyen style. It's not quite like a Scotty Young kind of baby thing, but everything that Dustin Nguyen draws, everyone looks very young. That's just kind of how he draws faces.
And everyone that Lemire draws looks very haggard.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The 12-year-old kid that Lemire draws, a 12-year-old who's like lived 65 years.
Right. And they're like, I thought you were all Canadian and you had good health care and all this other stuff. Like, why does everyone look so run down in your books?
Everyone that Sorrentino draws just looks haunted. Like, every character, it feels like the weight of everything is on them, and you can see it in their faces, the way he draws faces and eyes. And so I think it's again the fact that he goes back to these people over and over again and can tell different types of stories and knows what the strengths are and isn't worried about, well, I have a style. Like, he's not worried about the Jeff Lemire brand, as it were, that everything I do has got to look like the stuff that I do on my own.
Right.
It's like he understands that Jeff Lemire, the cartoonist, can do his thing, and that's a brand. That's a strong brand. When it's just his name on the cover and he's written it and he's drawn it, you know what you're going to get there. But he's not afraid to say, okay, when I work with Andrea Sorrentino, that's going to be a different brand. Yes. When I work with Dustin Nguyen, that's going to be a different brand than the other two. And then when I do Black Hammer, that's my own superhero thing. That's a different brand. But
even that is now branching out where like Matt Kent did the Batman or the Black Hammer 45 or whatever it was. But again that. And Patton Oswalt's writing for it now. Which is,
Patton Oswalt, he wrote a short story one shot, which is very, very good. But yeah, it's the idea that he is not afraid to have these different aspects and feel like he's not, like no one's confused about what's a Jeff Lemire book. Because, so look, Tom King is one of my favorite writers.
Yes, I know that.
Love Tom King. He's got a strong brand. Doesn't matter what he's writing. When he writes a character, like his approach is going to be very, very same. Doesn't matter if it's supernatural, if it's super powered, if it's a regular dude. He writes a very similar type of way, and you're going to get that across the board. And that is his brand as a writer.
Right. To me, there's a one-panel summary of Tom King's writing in Mr. Miracle, and there's a mirror that he looks into. And you can see what his body would look like if it had never been repaired from all of the battles and stuff. And it's just him kind of smiling, or has like a relatively neutral expression into the mirror, and just an extremely brutalized, tortured man looking back at him. Yeah. And I'm like, bam, that's Tom King's approach to a character. Yeah. Yeah. Is a mirror that sees through the facade. The
joke is always that he writes superheroes looking out windows and crying. Like that's the joke.
It's reductive and but it is funny. Yeah. It's funny because there's like enough truth to it. Yeah. But it's too reductive to be taken seriously.
Yeah. But again, the idea is that his brand as a writer, you know what you're going to get there. He may vary things a little bit here and there. He can change the tone a little here and there, but you're going to get something that's pretty introspective, character based. That's what you're going to get. Doesn't matter what he's writing across the board. Again, I think Lemire is so malleable that he can write for any genre, any artist, and again, he's not afraid of like diluting his brand. There's no worry about that. He feels confident that if I want to work with this artist in this way, I can do that, and I can do this straight horror thing with Andrea Sorrentino.
Horror.
I can create this whole new
nothing Lemirian about it in terms of anything he had done up until then.
I can create this whole horror universe anthology, this Bone Orchard thing, all interconnected. That can be graphic novels. We'll do some short stories. We'll do some miniseries. All this different stuff there, and that's going to have no effect on me then going and trying to finish up the story in Black Hammer and write about my superheroes that I've created in my world there.
And if Marvel taps him and says, "Hey, we need you to do 20 issues on such and such character,"
he's probably not anymore. He would have at one point. At this point, he's probably like, "No, I don't need to do that."
I mean, he took the Century just a couple years ago.
Well,
he took the Terrifics. Not that, but again, both of those, he got to first base. Like he hit the ball off. He did like 5 issues for each of those, and then handed it off to a lesser known name because they wanted to sell first issues.
At the time, right before he jumped onto the Terrifics, he had said publicly that he was done with for hire work. And then, came back to it, and that's just how it goes. And even, the two Black Killer books, the one Black Killer book he did with Sorrentino, Joke Killer Smile, and then the one follow-up, the Batman
Smile Killer.
Yeah, which is, it's one book. It's 2 separate books, I guess, technically.
It says a criminal activity that it was hardbound separately.
Yeah, it should have been all together. But, he takes a creator he works with on the creator-owned side, works something on DC. Same thing with Dustin Nguyen. They've been working on, they're best known for Ascender and Descender, and then Little Monsters, which is out right now. They did a little 3-issue miniseries called Robin and Batman about the early days of Dick Grayson and the Teen Titans.
Yeah. So I don't think he's going to take a long ongoing arc.
No.
But I think he's totally... So there are 2 ways to make money.
If he's got a cool idea, if he's got a good idea, and he says, hey, I want to write I got this story... But also, Dustin I think there's about Robin and Batman.
There's 2 ways to make a lot of money as a creator. One is to be on the Comic-Con circuit, where you go to 40 comic events in a year while writing and illustrating whatever from hotel rooms and mailing it off, or you just produce a ton of stuff and don't show your face very often. And I think that's kind of Lemire. I scan like a 150-mile radius every year for every comic event, waiting for Lemire to be within a few hundred miles of me, and he just doesn't. I assume he goes to San Diego.
I don't think he's there now
to collect his awards.
No,
Not even to collect his awards.
They send your awards to you. I know Jock was in San Diego to pick up the award for Snow Angels. I'm pretty sure Lemire wasn't. But
Lemire is also like filming on set right now for Essex County.
Yeah.
And Sweet Tooth season 2 just wrapped.
Yeah.
And he's still publishing all these books. He's now in TV. It has not slowed down his production at all.
I saw a thing about him. I think he's one of the rare people, maybe not, I don't know how rare it is, but like he has a studio that isn't in his house, which means he gets up every day and goes to an office, quote unquote.
Pay rent, yeah.
And works an 8-hour day and then goes home. And, and not despair, people work however they want. A lot of artists, a lot of writers, they work at a home studio, and they work at whatever hours they can because they're juggling family and life and things like that.
Right.
So if you're home and you can take care of your kids and then kids go to bed, maybe you work from 11 to 3 in the morning. Doesn't seem like the healthiest way to live, but a lot of guys do that.
No.
But Lemire goes to an office and he sits down and puts the work in. And the thing that I remember him saying in this little video was that the thing he was working on, it wasn't the next thing that's coming out, because the next thing that's coming out from him is already printed. The thing he's working on is a thing after that, because the thing after the next thing is already done. So he's working on a thing 3 things from now that basically you probably wouldn't even see for a year and a half. So he's that far ahead.
Right.
He just sits down and puts the work in, and he's incredibly prolific because of it. And yeah, he doesn't go to a lot of cons. He doesn't a lot of
But
shows.
I think that 9 to 5 mentality and just constantly producing and getting deadlines and doing things reminds me of the era of like, that's how I envision, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, like all those guys. They were in the office every day.
Yeah.
They were producing a ton of stuff. I don't think they had quite the batting average that Lemire has, but they were also producing probably 3 times as much stuff. 3 times
as much stuff, yeah. And it was definitely more than 8 hours. Those guys were there crazy hours.
Yeah, just around the clock.
Yeah.
And so I think for most modern 21st century artists and creators, it looks like Lemire's nuts by the standards of like the golden era, silver era. He's
still taking it easy.
Yeah, he's a very moderate pace. Yeah. And I think, to me, he fuses together the best elements historically of comic book storytelling, but he also pulls in elements of other like mediums, other like TV and movies and storytelling. And one thing, I am on his Substack and he does mailbag all the time. One thing that I've asked multiple times is I would love to know where he got this idea of like the way he uses time in storytelling. He's always flashing back. And in fact, I think the most extreme example is in Sweet Tooth Volume 5. Volume 4 ends with the climax. You think the story's about over because it's like this denouement. And then it switches back to 5 and it's like 200 years in the past or something.
Yeah.
And it's 6 straight issues back in that setting. And you're like, what happened to the thing we're watching? Yeah. And like, why'd you change the channel, Dad?
Yeah.
And then it like finally cuts back for Volume 6. And I think he's able to hold the tension like that. And he does that on micro scales within a single issue, and he'll do it through arcs. Yeah. And I'm like, he started doing that like around the time Lost was doing that as like the primary mechanism for storytelling on TV. It was popular in movies at the time, and we see that he's got a close friendship with Damon Lindelof, who is obviously
I don't know
with Lost.
I think,
but how prominent was that in comics prior to the 2000s?
It was. I think Lemire's stuff, though, he is always interested in time, whether it is flashbacks, whether it is time travel, whether it is telling stories about generations through time, the same family, the same place. He has maybe the vast majority, maybe all of his work that he writes and draws for himself. Time is a huge factor. Whether it is time travel, whether it is simply flashing back to an earlier time in a family, generational, fathers to sons, mothers to daughters, parents to children, how things are passed down. It's the
perspective that time offers on human life.
It's the constant theme. It's the constant theme, and how he chooses to portray that. Whether it's something like Essex County, which is you're just basically seeing vignettes through history all through time. Whether it's someone like Sweet Tooth, where you get a flashback, to an earlier
Right.
time. Whether it's something like Underwater Welder here, we'll get to, which has an element of time travel or consciousness travel, where a character goes,
Right.
So
Or Frog Catchers, where your mind is just flitting through time simultaneously.
Yeah. So the
Maze Book is a little that way as well. Again, it's a signature, right? It's in everything.
The presentation of time is different each time, each project. Whatever suits the narrative need, the narrative specifics. But there's always some level of dealing with and discussing with time, and usually always time wrapped with the idea of family and generations. And
it's
a
not
a lot of generational trauma, passed down trauma. How do you deal with that as a son, a grandson, whatever, going down the line from who you were, the people that came before you. There's a lot of that shared history that he's dealing with across all of his projects.
Yeah, and it's not he doesn't. That's an interesting one, because I guess I could have identified it, but I hadn't. That family, specifically parental things, either from the parent's perspective or the child's perspective, is what he hinges on. It's not a lot of like friendships, partnerships, work colleague type relationships. No, it's paternal.
Those are aspects. Yeah, it's paternal. Well, it's paternal. It's also like with siblings, like with something like Roughneck. But it's about family. It's about a unit there. I think you pointed out there. Sometimes it's the perspective of a parent to the child. Sometimes it's perspective of a child to the parent. He writes from both perspectives there, but it's a central theme of all of his stories. I mentioned siblings as well. Also, Royal City was about mainly about the siblings. Less so about the children to their parents. It was more about the siblings, and that had some outside friend group kind of thing, which is a little unusual for what he does there. But the heart of it was about the family and their loss, and dealing with that. So yeah, it's a constant theme in the stuff that he does for himself.
And I will say the only recurring, not consistent, not ever present, but the only recurring negative theme for me is cutting things short, which go read Plutona.
Yep.
And it's like
4 issues, I think.
It's 4 or 5.
Yeah,
it's one trade.
Yeah.
And when you read that, you're like, where are you going to go with this? This is so good. Like, I would read 30, 40 issues of this,
and then it ends.
And that's it. And Sentient.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, you got me so invested in these kids and this AI ship that's their surrogate parent, and then they just quickly arrive at their destination and it's over. Yeah. And Royal City, it's like, oh, I finally learned all the characters' names. Despite his artwork, I can tell them all apart. We're really going somewhere. It's just a hard wrap at 14 issues, I think is what it was. It was like an oversized 14th, and it ended.
I thought it was 12, but it's something like that.
It's something something where you wouldn't have expected a natural break, almost like ending on issue 193 or something. But no one would do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly no tent pole would do that.
There is a sense of, and I think something that you and I talked about before. One thing that Lemire said specifically with Royal City was that he had intended it to go longer or be an ongoing, but as he was writing the story, he figured out what the ending was in his head, and once
he found it, and
once he did that, he couldn't. He just had to get there now, and so I think there's something to be said about that. I think that he is not someone to just drag a story out. If he has a story in mind, he's going to tell it. I think May's book was like that. Primordial was like that, where maybe the endings weren't the maybe not didn't live up to maybe what the setup was, but I think it's a matter of, I'm going to tell a story here, and we're going to execute it, and we're going to do it. And if it didn't land for you, okay, well, don't worry, there'll be another miniseries or something, another graphic novel coming out here soon that you can jump onto, and maybe that one will hit you better. So I don't think he has an issue with endings, but I think it's a matter of,
he sticks the ending in those, I just want more.
Want it to last longer before he gets there. Yeah,
right.
I can see that. I can see that.
But which is the opposite. Almost every other writer and medium in the world, I complain about them rambling on and prattling on for too long. By the way, Royal City was 14 issues.
Was 14, okay.
And this is just, I pulled it up on like an online comic shop here. The description for issue 14 is a 2018 Eisner Award nominee for Best New Series and Best Writer, Jeff Lemire. Talks about the Pike family saga and all this other stuff, multi-generational. That came out August 2018. Mm-hmm. We know he works ahead. It almost looks like he was nominated for Best New Series in July, didn't get it, wrapped in August. I know that's not how it happened, but that is just looking at the timeline now, it looks like fine. I'll do something else great.
Yeah, no,
I'll win with Gideon Falls next year.
I'll be willing to bet that Royal City wrapped up sometime in the early spring of 2018 before he did that. So, but yeah, so I don't know if we have anything else on.
No, and I think this is
on the preface here. Do you want to try to get a little synopsis? Cover the characters.
Underwater Welder. Yeah, I think we should. Or I could just read the back of the book to you, because if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, creator spotlight, do I want to buy this book, get it from the library, whatever, do I want to read it? What's the pitch? I guess you can read the back of the book for yourself. Sure. It's a good summary. Mm-hmm. How would you summarize Underwater Welder? I've tried many times. It's my favorite book. I find it hard to talk about. I'm always just like, I'll buy you a copy. Please read it.
Yeah, that's I wrote a little synopsis here. I don't know. It's like I guess it's the plot synopsis. So what I wrote here is, I don't know if I stole this from somewhere.
It needs a plot synopsis, and it needs like a conceptual synopsis.
It is, yeah. So the plot synopsis is pretty straightforward. It's on the verge of becoming a father, our main character, Jack Joseph, dives deep in the ocean in hopes of finding answers to his past while not losing what he has in the present. That's very vague.
That's good, yeah. That's actually great.
Yeah, but I can say that to you, and you may understand conceptually what I'm talking about, but I've described absolutely nothing what happens in the book. Nothing about the setup, the premise.
True.
There's nothing in there that actually tells you what this book is about. That's kind of the
and that's always my struggle with a book like this. How did he go to the publisher and pitch this?
Yeah.
Was he like, is this a Twilight Zone episode? Or
I think what I've written here is that's what the book feels like. Those are the vibes of the book. But what is it about?
It's not a beat for beat recap. Yeah. And that, I think, mentioned nothing about him wrestling with child abandonment as a potential father while still sorting through his feeling of abandonment from his father.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I mean, that sounds like, on one hand, I love that. To me, that's the crux of the book. That's what draws me to it. That fear, that anxiety, that, I have to get all my own stuff solved before I can start, on any kind of new journey. That tension, that paranoia is what I love. But that by itself doesn't do the book justice, and frankly sounds like if you were using TV Guide and saw an episode of Dr. Phil, right? It's
and you saw that on
a man struggles with his father and struggles to become a father.
Yeah, you're like, I've seen that before.
Right, and it's like it could be daytime television, but this super isn't.
Yeah, no, I do. Great. That's a big thing you mentioned. Like, what was his pitch? Like, what was his elevator pitch? I do wonder because in
2012 he's still making elevator pitches. I would think.
I would still. He still has to.
I don't think
he
has to
pitch.
Do that for Bone Orchard.
He still has to sell what he wants to do. He has to convince someone. Especially, this is an original graphic novel, so he's delivering 200 some pages. Hey,
right.
Pay me so I can do this, and then you can publish it and make money off it. Like that's a tough sell because the specifics of it's called Underwater Welder. What does that mean? Well, our main character welds underwater. Right. Like that's not super important, but like it kind of is because it means he's away from home, but he's not that far from home. He's 30-minute boat ride.
Right.
So it isn't like he's got to stay on the rig out there. He can't come back every day, but like it isn't like he's going 3,000 miles away. It's a dangerous job. Yes, he's welding underwater, but like it's the idea of like these specifics about the character and the specifics of how he was raised. He's in the same town that he grew up in, the same one where his father died / disappeared / left him. There are all these other parts, but like again, that's what happens. But what is it actually about? And I think you hit it perfectly. It's the idea of the Jack's specific idea of abandonment and the idea that he's about to be a father. So he feels he's not ready for that until, he said he gets all of his stuff together. He deals with everything about his own father, that he can't, he doesn't feel ready because he doesn't feel complete or perfect or something like that. Like,
right. Right. It's like someone like I'm not done being parented. I'm certainly not ready to do parenting.
Yeah. The only way I can be a parent is if I'm like 100% ready and I know exactly what's coming.
Which, for the record, has always been my position.
Yeah.
And I've never wanted kids. I don't like babies. I like cats because they'll like snuggle with me for like an hour or something a day and then leave me alone.
Yeah.
Like I don't want needy younglings around me.
That's great too, because you're on the verge of becoming a father yourself. So
I know. And by the time people hear this, I will, if all things go well, I will have been a father for 2 months by the time you hear this.
Yeah. And we'll hold on to this for about 4 or 5 years so we can play this back for
my
your
child will have to listen
be like,
to this.
Yes, you rate below cats. Congrats.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't think there will be any arguing with a 5-year-old that you are needier to me than the cats are, which is my only argument. It's like, I just like my space. I like my time. And I do have that feeling of like, oh boy, like every little decision I make is thousands of dollars of counseling for that kid. Like this kid will either super love or super hate comics. And I don't really have any control over that. And that's going to be tough. Like I can't imagine growing up in a house with thousands of comic books and being completely indifferent. I feel like you'll either love it or you'll resent it.
Probably.
And that's, that's one of those things where it's like, hey, you don't get to pick your child. You just have a child.
Yeah.
And, however, so I was telling my wife about all this and I said, and the main character, his wife's name is Susan. And she's always, I think she's extremely good natured, doesn't want to be a nag, but is also trying to get him to move forward with life. Yeah. And by the way, my wife's name is Susan and always trying to get me to move forward. And is not a nag about it. Is extremely patient and willing to put up with stuff that no one should have to put up with from me. So, as soon as I was telling her about this book, she started reading it. I think try to figure me out. And I said, don't worry, it does have a very happy ending.
Are you trying to convince her that you aren't Jack? That you're definitely not
I'm
like
not
Jack?
Jack. Yeah.
Trying to.
So I share Jack's struggle, but hopefully also Jack's resolution,
his redemption,
and his resolve. And I think it's like all he needed was like the right amount of pressure, but also some time and some space, and he came out okay.
Yeah.
And I think to me, it's like it's such a dark struggle in the book, and it comes out so optimistic. And I don't think we're spoiling anything here because we're still using really vague language.
But I think
I find it uplifting, but it's not like a feel-good story.
Well, I think because the way he goes about trying to achieve that space and time for himself is pretty negative. Like he doesn't do that in a healthy way.
Right.
The end result works out. He has this kind of his moment of realization, his moment of clarity, and he's able to come through the other side. But I think the need he expresses of like, I'm not ready. I need a, it's not that I don't want this. It's maybe I don't want this right now. But that's kind of hard to say to a wife who's 8 months pregnant. So right. So I don't think it's unreasonable there. But again, the idea of him, I need some time, some space to kind of get my head right. I don't think that's unreasonable, but the way he does it in the story comes from a fairly negative place,
right?
And from I think a a wholly selfish place too. Like he may be trying to disguise it to Susan. Like, well, listen, I need this. It'll be better for us. I'll be there. Blah blah blah. He's trying to convince his wife.
You give me this, and I'll be.
I'll be there. Yeah. But I think when he's saying that, I think he's lying to himself. I think it's completely a selfish move that he feels. I got to do this for myself. I have to go back out there, which is why he keeps going out to the rig. His wife's 8 months pregnant, and he's going back out for another, however 30 days or whatever, a couple weeks on the rig to work some more shifts. And pretty much everyone he meets is like, really, you going back out there? Like,
and his supervisor's like, why are you out here?
Yeah, like shouldn't you be home right now? Because aren't you having having a kid
okay.
soon?
Now we're starting to get into the first episode, so we're gonna wrap that. But I think as you were talking, what I thought is, I think the closest analogy in all media, I think this is like Good Will Hunting without the super intellect. It's a regular guy going through a very similar struggle. Like, you're just stuck at a certain age of development, and you get selfish, and you keep pushing off, relationships that try to press you forward.
And you just need that one. You need to find that breakthrough. Yeah. If you don't have that release, it'll destroy you.
Which I'm assuming you've seen Good Will Hunting.
Yes.
That was probably college for you, right? Or late high school, maybe.
Late high school, yeah.
Still, probably one of my favorite movies. I just haven't returned to it in a very long time.
But I think that's a similar thing. The idea that he's holding everything in. This character's holding everything in.
But I think what makes him relatable, unlike Matt Damon's character, is that this guy isn't a genius or anything.
Yeah.
He's just a guy. He's like blue-collar worker.
Yeah, he's a regular dude. But yeah, the idea that I think both those characters, that you can sense they want some level of absolution or clarity, but they don't know how to get there. And it is until they're kind of pushed to the edge and they have this moment, that they have this realization that they can then move forward, move on, and actually start to grow as a person and move into the next phase of their life, when maybe they've just been stuck in whatever phase they've been in for however long. But yeah, I think that's an apt comparison, kind of on a surface level, between Will in the movie and our main character Jack.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is our intro. I don't know how we can sell you any more on Jeff Lemire or Underwater Welder. Neither of us are salesmen, right?
No, not.
We don't get commissioned on anything in life or in podcasting. But if you were going to listen to, like a one shot from us, I think Underwater Welder will probably be it. I mean, if this Jeff Lemire pitch, I hope it's been fun to listen to, because to me, I'm like, this feels to me like bearing my soul. However, I am like an Enneagram Type 5 or INTP on the Myers-Briggs. I'm not a big sharer, like, personally. So this is about as much as you'll get from me in terms of self-disclosure.
Which is simply, read this book and you'll understand me.
Right.
I'm not going to tell you, but if you read this, you'll get it.
Right, which is, to me, it's like, well, if I could articulate how I was feeling, I wouldn't need to hand you books and things like that. So
if you could articulate it, you would have written this. Right?
Yeah, in fact, I toyed with a comic writing a draft one time. And I finished a full comic, and I had mapped out the arc of where it was going to go. And it was very Jeff Lemire vibey. And to me, I ultimately threw it away and didn't try to find an illustrator or anything, because it felt like I was doing a Jeff Lemire cover band. Which honestly, it's like, I guess I would rather be a Jeff Lemire cover band than anyone else's cover band.
It's not the worst thing.
And most people, when they start out creating, they start out imitating whoever they want to be like, and then find their own voice. But my thing is, I just get too self-conscious with creating work. So I just create a podcast about work. And that works. So thank you for joining, and we will see you next week for the Underwater Welder.
Peace.